Who is Stan Lee? A story for English learners. Chapter 1. When Stan was a kid, Stanley Lieber, who we know as Stan Lee, was born on December 28, 1922, in a big city called New York. His parents, Jack and Celia, had moved to the United States from a faraway place called Romania. They lived in a small apartment and dreamed of a better life where they could have a family and their own house. Jack worked at a factory cutting cloth for dresses. He didn't earn much money and had to work for many hours. Celia stayed at home to take care of Stan. When Stan was 6, a difficult time called the Great Depression started. Lots of people lost their jobs, and this happened to Stan's dad too. Things got harder for Stan's family. They had to move to an even smaller place. They slept in the living room and the only window in the house looked at a brick wall. Stan's mom wanted him to finish school quickly so he could get a job and help the family. She encouraged Stan to work hard at his studies, and he did. He was so good that he skipped a few classes and was always the youngest in his class. This made it a bit tough for him to make friends. Stan had a teacher he really liked, Mr. Ginsberg. He was funny and always told jokes. Stan learned from him that people remember stories better if they're funny. Stan liked to write a lot when he was a kid. He loved reading too, even if it was just the words on a ketchup bottle. He always had a book or a magazine with him, even during meals. He liked a book series called The Hardy Boys about two brave brothers. Stan also enjoyed drawing. He wasn't the best artist, but he liked using drawings to tell his stories. During summer, other kids would go to camps outside the city. But Stan's family didn't have enough money for that. So, Stan would stay at home and read. His mom even got him a stand to hold his books while he ate. Stan also liked watching movies. There were 5 movie theaters near his home, and he would go whenever he had money for a ticket. He loved movies like Frankenstein, Sherlock Holmes, and King Kong. He dreamed of being like the actor Errol Flynn, who played Robin Hood. When Stan was 9, his little brother, Larry, was born. As Stan got older, his family needed him to help out more, so he started working. Stan wasn't scared of working hard. He did different jobs like writing for a news company, delivering sandwiches, and working in a pants-making company's office. But even when he was busy helping his family, Stan never stopped writing. He was so good at it that he won a writing contest many times. The people at the newspaper told him to stop entering the contest to give others a chance to win. But they also told him he was a great writer and should keep writing. This made Stan really happy and he never forgot their kind words. Chapter 2. How Stan became Stan Lee. In 1939, when Stan was only 16, he finished high school. Most kids his age were thinking about going to college. But not Stan. He knew he had to keep working. With help from his cousin Gene, he got a job at a company called Timely, which was managed by a man named Martin Goodman. Mr. Goodman didn't know Stan very well. When Stan first came to work, Mr. Goodman asked, "What are you doing here?" Stan never found out if Mr. Goodman had forgotten about him. He was too busy. Timely made a lot of magazines from their offices in a place called Manhattan. Some magazines had stories about adventures in the Wild West. Others were about science and health. Stan was given a job in the comics department of Timely. But this department only had 2 people, Joe and Jack. Joe was actually Joe Simon. He was the big boss of words in the comics. Jack was Jack Kirby. He was the best artist there. These 2 men taught Stan a lot. But they weren't very friendly. When Stan first came to work, they barely said hello. In his first days at work, Stan's job was to do whatever Joe and Jack needed. Even though he only got $8 a week, Stan was happy. He was proud to be working at Timely. Every day, Stan would travel from his home in the Bronx to Timely's offices on a street called 42nd Street. Joe and Jack's office was pretty plain. Jack would sit and draw. Joe would walk around the room. Stan would joke that he couldn't see them because of all the cigar smoke. During this time, there were many other companies making comic books. DC Comics, another company, had famous superheroes like Superman and Batman. Timely's superheroes were not as well known. The Human Torch was a robot made in a lab who could shoot fire from his hands and even catch fire himself. But he couldn't always control this fire. The Submariner had a bigger problem. He was the son of a human sailor and a princess from a place called Atlantis, and he didn't seem to like humans much. In 1940, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby created a superhero called Captain America for Timely Comics. There was a big war happening in Europe, and they were scared about what they heard about a bad man named Adolf Hitler. Captain America's job was to fight against Hitler's country, Germany. He wore a red, white, and blue suit like the American flag and had a shield that could stop bullets. The first Captain America comic book was very successful. It sold 1 million copies. Now, Superman had some competition. This is when Stan got a chance to do more than just answer phones. One day, Joe Simon asked Stan if he could write a story for a new Captain America comic book. Stan was super excited. He wrote a story called Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge. No one said a lot about his first story. But Stan was okay with that. He was just happy to get to write another story right after. After The Traitor's Revenge, Stan wrote more and more. While he was writing, he decided to use a different name, a pen name, instead of his real name. He thought about names like Headline Hunter, Foreign Correspondent, Stan Martin, and even Niels Nats, which is Stan Lee, spelled backward. He didn't want to use his full name, Stanley Lieber. "I'm saving that for a big important book," he joked later, "which I never wrote." In the end, he picked a pen name, Stan Lee, a shorter version of his real name. Chapter 3. The Young Boss. Stan was given more and more writing jobs while Joe and Jack were given less and less. Mr. Goodman, the boss, was a bit tough. He didn't like to pay the artists much, which made them unhappy. So, Joe and Jack chose to leave the company. Stan looked around for someone to take their place and then he realized, I'm the only guy here. Stan had lots of ideas for stories, but he wasn't a very good artist. So, he worked closely with the artists who could draw. He also continued as the boss of the company even though he was only 18 years old. Sometimes when he answered the office door, people would ask him, "Hey, kid, where's Mr. Lee?" For about a year, Stan was the one who ran Timely. He wrote all sorts of stories that Mr. Goodman wanted. These included stories about cowboys, mysteries, scary stories, and even some love stories. As much as Stan enjoyed his job, he was thinking about something else. His country, the United States, had entered a big war, World War II, and Stan wanted to help. He chose to join the army and started his duties in the winter of 1942. Stan's job in the army was to be a playwright, which means he was a writer. Because he was good at writing, Stan was given a job writing catchy phrases, manuals, and films for training soldiers. This was a special job. Only 8 other people have ever been called a playwright by the U.S. Army, including famous movie director Frank Capra, novelist William Saroyan, and Theodore Geisel, who is better known as Dr. Seuss. Incredibly, Stan kept working for Timely while he was in the army. The company would send Stan ideas by mail, and he would send back completed stories from wherever he was stationed. Stan was proud to serve his country, but he was very happy when the war ended in 1945. He couldn't wait to get back to his comic book world. Chapter 4. Meet Joni. After World War II ended, Stan came back to New York to be Timely's boss again. He was going to be the boss for over 35 years. He was so happy. He got a small apartment in a hotel and bought a big, white car. It was the first brand new car he ever had. Then, things got even more exciting. A friend wanted Stan to meet a model named Betty. His friend thought Stan and Betty would be a great pair. But when Stan went to meet her at the modeling agency, he met the prettiest woman he had ever seen. But she was not Betty. She was a lady named Joan. Joan Clayton Bukic was a beautiful woman with red hair, blue eyes, and a great sense of humor. She had moved from England to New York to model hats. In the 1940s, women wore hats all the time, and hat models were always very pretty. Their faces were in advertisements in newspapers and magazines. Stan did not hide his feelings. On their first day, he told Joan, "I love you." Joan laughed, but she agreed to go on a date with him. On December 5, 1947, Stan and Joan got married. They were married by the same judge who had just helped Joan end her first marriage. Stan was so happy and wanted to marry Joan quickly, before she could change her mind. Stan was so happy and started calling Joan, Joni. Stan and Joni moved to a small apartment near Timely's office in Manhattan. It was so tiny that it could barely fit their bed. But they didn't mind. They had fun going out dancing with their friends. 2 years later, Stan and Joan moved to a house on Long Island, near New York City. When Stan's mom, Celia, passed away, his younger brother, Larry, moved in with them. He was only 15 years old. And it's good they had more room. In 1950, Stan and Joan had a baby girl, Joan Celia. But they were very sad when their second daughter, Jan, passed away a few days after she was born. Doctors told Joni she couldn't have any more children. Stan loved his daughter, JC. He would put her on his shoulders and carry her around their big yard. He took pictures of her with their friendly dogs, Blackie and Simba. And, to spend more time with JC, Stan tried to work at home as much as possible. Stan was happy to not be in Timely's smoky office. He would work outside in the sun. He had his typewriter on a table in the backyard and he would stand while working. Sometimes, his friends would come over. Sometimes, JC would have her young friends over to play. Stan would read all his comic book words out loud while writing. It helped him make the superheroes sound right. He would shout the most exciting parts, like, pow, and, zap. JC's friends sometimes wondered why her father was being so loud. JC told them not to worry. That was just her father working. Chapter 5. Trouble with comics. Not everyone liked comics as much as Stan did. Starting in the early 1940s, some grown-ups thought comic books were not good for kids. Why? They were full of fights, scary details, and creepy stories. People were worried that comics would make kids do dangerous things. In 1948, mad parents even set fire to comic books in public in Binghamton, New York, and Spencer, West Virginia. In 1949, a very popular magazine called Family Circle published a story called, "What Can You Do About Comic Books?" The story told parents they should read comic books before their kids did to make sure they were safe and not too scary. Stan and the other comic book makers didn't worry too much about the complaints. They were still selling lots of comic books. But in 1954, Frederick Wortham, a kid psychologist, wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent. Dr. Wortham said that comics were harmful to children. His ideas led to big meetings in Washington, D.C., about whether to ban comic books. Some stores even stopped selling them to kids. These big meetings made a big difference. 15 comic book companies had to close in 1954 alone. The publishers that were left tried their best to keep going. Together, they started the Comics Code Authority. They made their own rules to make sure comic books didn't have stories that would make parents or leaders upset. The Comics Code Authority had to say okay to every comic book before it was printed. If they said it was okay, the comic book could use the Comics Code seal of approval on its front cover. That meant it was safe for kids to read. Chapter 6. The Birth of Marvel. By 1960, Stan had been making comic books for 20 years. But he wasn't enjoying it much anymore. Comic books weren't popular. Kids liked watching TV shows and listening to rock and roll music more than reading about old superheroes. Even Captain America stopped being published because not many people were buying it. Stan missed the good old times when he and Jack Kirby would work together in the smoky rooms at Timely. He missed his old team and how excited he used to be to go to work. He told Joni that he wanted to quit. He was going to tell Mr. Goodman that he was done making comics. But then something happened. Just when he was ready to quit, Mr. Goodman gave Stan a cool new task. A rival company, DC Comics, had just made a comic book, The Justice League of America. This comic book didn't just have one superhero. It had 7 superheroes all working together: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and the Martian Manhunter. Justice League comics were selling really well. Mr. Goodman asked Stan to make his own team. He even suggested bringing back Captain America and the Human Torch. When Stan told Joni about Mr. Goodman's idea, she said she would always support him. She knew that Stan loved a creative challenge. "Stan," Joni said, "if Martin wants you to make a new group of superheroes, maybe you could do it in a way that you've always wanted to." What she meant was that Stan had nothing to lose. If he took a big chance and upset Mr. Goodman, he might lose his job. But that didn't matter because Stan was already planning to quit. But if he made something really special, he might make Mr. Goodman happy and feel excited about work again like in the early days at Timely. Stan didn't want to just bring back old characters. He wanted to make new ones. His new team wouldn't be super handsome like Superman or super strong like Captain America. They would have the same problems and weaknesses as normal people. Their lives wouldn't always be easy. Stan knew who could help him: his old partner Jack. It had been years since Jack had quit his regular job at Timely Comics. But since 1958, Jack had been helping Stan with some work. Now, Stan needed Jack to help him make a new generation of comic book heroes. In the 1950s, Mr. Goodman had changed Timely's name to Atlas Comics. But Stan thought the company needed a new name. Times were changing. Stan was making comics in a new way. Even though he was using superheroes again, these new heroes were different. They had problems. They sometimes struggled with their superpowers and wished they were just normal humans again. Stan remembered the title used in one of the early comic books published by Timely, Marvel. He liked how that sounded. And Mr. Goodman agreed. Stan gave his team of artists and writers at Marvel Comics nicknames and called the team his bullpen. The writers, artists, and inkers worked in the main room at Marvel. Stan wanted Marvel's readers to think of the company as a big clubhouse where everyone had fun, told jokes, and made awesome comic books. If readers had a question, they could send a letter directly to Stan. He would answer those letters on a page he put in every comic book called Bullpen Bulletins. Stan had fun writing these pages. He gave each bulletin a funny title at the top of the page, like, "More Fun, Important, Mind-Blowing Notes from Your Marvel Madman." Stan wrote a letter to readers called Stan's Soapbox, and came up with his own favorite sayings, like, "Nuff said," and "Excelsior." Stan joked that other comic book companies were brand each. Marvel Comics was the best. Chapter 7. Spider-Man. Even after all the fun changes and cool new comics, Stan had a new idea that was a bit hard for Mr. Goodman to understand. Why would anyone like a thin kid who could stick to roofs like a bug? Spider-Man. Don't people usually hate spiders? Stan said the idea for Spider-Man came from seeing a fly go up a wall. What if there was a superhero who could stick to things? He thought about a good name for a bit. Fly Man or Insect Man didn't sound cool. Then, Stan thought of Spider-Man. That sounded pretty good. He first wanted to ask his friend Jack Kirby to draw the new character, but Jack's style wasn't right. Jack drew Spider-Man too brave, too strong. Spider-Man was actually Peter Parker, a nerdy teenager who was often unsure about himself. At school, a big football player named Flash Thompson liked to pick on him. But then a spider that had been near some weird radiation bit Peter. Suddenly, Peter had superpowers. He could stick to walls and ceilings like he had little vacuum cleaners for hands. And he was super strong. To make this new superhero, Stan teamed up with artist Steve Ditko. Steve was a bit awkward and shy, and didn't really like parties. He was okay with making Peter Parker different. He wouldn't be a huge, strong hero. But when Peter turned into Spider-Man, Steve drew him like a classic superhero. He even designed a cool new costume for Spider-Man. Spider-Man showed up in a comic book for the first time in June 1962. He was perfect for Stan's new idea: regular people who become superheroes. Marvel's characters would have problems and make mistakes. But at the end of the day, they would still fight bad guys. Even though Mr. Goodman didn't believe it at first, the first Spider-Man comic was a hit. Actually, Marvel's new group of superheroes helped sell 13 million comic books in 1962. That's almost twice as many as they sold the year before. Stan had been part of the golden age of comics in the 1940s. Now, he was helping to create the Silver Age, which lasted from around 1956 to 1970. Comic book fans sometimes call this popular return to superheroes, and moving away from crime and romance stories, the Silver 60s, or the Marvel Age. Who said nobody likes spiders? Chapter 8. Marvel's movie magic. When Marvel Comics started earning loads of money, Mr. Goodman thought it was a good time to sell the company. A man named Martin Ackerman bought it in 1968, but only if Stan Lee stayed in charge. Stan stayed. Now, Stan was like the face of Marvel. While the artists were quiet, Stan was great at talking about Marvel. He spoke at schools and big meetings. He even had pictures taken for magazines and newspapers. Stan was known for his big mustache and always wearing sunglasses, even indoors. In 1972, Mr. Goodman retired, and Stan got a new job. He became the big boss of Marvel. Roy Thomas, who wrote for X-Men, became Marvel's editor. This meant Stan could come up with more ideas. Stan wanted Marvel characters to be on TV shows and in movies. TV was easy. In 1977, The Incredible Hulk was on TV. Stan didn't control the show, but he made an important decision. The people making The Incredible Hulk wanted Hulk to be red, not green. Stan said no. Hulk had to be green. The show ran for more than 80 episodes over 5 years. Movies were harder. For a long time, movie makers didn't want to make movies from comic books. They thought it would be hard to show comic book action with real actors. But in 1978, the movie Superman changed their minds. Superman made $300 million worldwide, the 6th highest earning film at the time. Hollywood realized superhero movies could work. Stan started to meet with Hollywood producers, and in 1980, he and Joni moved to Los Angeles. They bought a house with a view of the Sunset Strip, a cool area full of shops, restaurants, and music clubs. They loved Hollywood and made new friends in California. Their daughter JC worked as a model and started painting. Stan and Joni were excited to see her first art show. But even though Stan loved California, it wasn't easy to make movies. Movie producers fought and even sued each other. There were 8 different scripts for a Spider-Man movie, but nobody was happy. Director James Cameron wanted to make a Spider-Man movie, but he was too slow. He made other movies like Titanic and Aliens instead. In 1989, a movie about Marvel's character the Punisher was made, but it never came out in cinemas. The same happened with 1994's version of the Fantastic Four. Stan was surprised by the problems in Hollywood. Back in New York, Marvel Comics was also having problems. Ackerman sold Marvel in 1986, and the new owners tried to make the company bigger too fast. They bought companies that lost money. In 1996, Marvel went bankrupt. They had no money, but Stan didn't give up. He believed the Marvel characters would someday be loved by movie fans. And he knew Marvel needed him. Everybody knew Stan Lee. To help Marvel, the new owners had a plan. They created a department in Marvel only for making movies. They called it Marvel Studios. A man named Avi Arad was the boss. Avi had grown up reading Spider-Man comics in Hebrew in Israel. He was happy to get advice from Stan. With Avi as the boss, Marvel finally started making movies. The first one was Blade in 1998, about a superhero who hunted vampires. The movie earned $131 million around the world. The first X-Men movie came out in 2000 and was a big hit. People loved it, and it earned $200 million. Stan also had a small part in the movie as a hot dog seller. 2 years later, Spider-Man finally came out. The movie starred Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker and earned $822 million. After 20 years in Hollywood, Stan was finally seeing his dreams come true. Stan loved Spider-Man, but the biggest Marvel movie was yet to come. Iron Man came out in 2008, with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. Stan thought Robert Downey Jr. was perfect for the role. Iron Man was such a big hit, it led to 2 more movies. In 2013, Iron Man 3 earned $1.2 billion, making it the 5th highest earning movie of all time. Stan said in an interview, "I think Marvel will end up being the biggest company in showbiz." Chapter 9. Stan's story continues. When some people grow old, they stop working. They might play golf or go on a cruise. But not Stan. "I think if you love your job, it's like playing and you don't want to stop," he once told someone. It's so much fun. He was 89 years old when he said that. Even though Stan stopped being Marvel's big boss in the 1990s, he still helps make movies that have his characters. He doesn't need to work, as creating popular comic book characters has made him very rich. But Stan never cared much about money. He loved coming up with new ideas. As he got older, he tried new things. He even worked for Marvel's biggest competitor, DC Comics. In 2001, DC Comics asked Stan to write stories about their superheroes. Stan wrote a "Just Imagine" series about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and others. "As long as I can stay busy," he wrote, "it saves me from thinking too much about the past." And wow, has Stan stayed busy. He's made other companies, started his own YouTube channel, and spoken for a series of video games. He also often goes to comic book meetings. In fact, whenever he's there, tickets sell out very quickly. Stan is a real-life legend. Millions of people have read comic books or watched movies with his characters. Marvel even made a Stan Lee action figure. Stan loves his work and his family. He and Joan have now been married for more than 65 years. And JC, their daughter, is often with her parents. She is often seen with her father at movie premieres. Stan and his younger brother, Larry, continue to work together on the Spider-Man comic that is printed in hundreds of newspapers each day. Stan is not done yet. In 2010, he started hosting his own TV show, Stan Lee's Superhumans. And in an interview just after his 90th birthday, he got excited as he talked about future Marvel movies, mentioning movies about Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, and Guardians of the Galaxy. Sadly, Stan had to cancel a visit to a comic convention in Denver. But it wasn't because he was too tired or too old. It was because Hollywood needed him. They were filming The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and it was time for Stan's next short appearance in the movie. As Stan would say, what could be more fun? Chapter 10. Timelines of Stan Lee. 1922. Stanley Lieber, who we know as Stan Lee, is born in New York City. 1939. Stan starts working at Timely Comics as an assistant. 1941. Stan's first comic book story is published in Captain America Comics number 3. Later that year, he becomes the editor at Timely. 1942. Stan joins the U.S. Army to help in World War II. 1945. Stan comes back to Timely Comics after his time in the Army. 1947. Stan marries Joan Clayton Bukic, the love of his life. 1950. Stan and Joan welcome their daughter, Joan Celia, J.C. 1951. Timely Comics changes its name to Atlas Comics. 1961. Stan and Jack Kirby create the Fantastic Four, their first superhero team. Atlas Comics changes its name again, this time to Marvel Comics. 1962. Stan and Steve Ditko create Spider-Man, one of Marvel's most iconic characters. 1965. Stan starts Bullpen Bulletins, including his letter to readers, known as Stan's Soapbox. 1971. The U.S. government asks Stan to create a Spider-Man story that talks about the dangers of drugs, and he agrees. 1980. Stan moves to Los Angeles to work on making movies for Marvel Comics. 1994. Stan is honored by being added to the Will Eisner Hall of Fame, which recognizes the best comic book creators. 1998. Blade, starring Wesley Snipes, becomes Marvel's first big movie. 2000. The first X-Men movie is released, introducing Marvel's famous team of mutants to cinema audiences. 2002. The first Spider-Man movie comes out, followed by Spider-Man 2 inches in 2004, Spider-Man 3 inches in 2007, and The Amazing Spider-Man in 2012. 2008. The first Iron Man movie is released, with Iron Man 2 inches following in 2010, and Iron Man 3 inches in 2013. 2012. A documentary about Stan called Stan Lee, with Great Power, is released, celebrating his life and career. Stan continued to work and make cameos in Marvel films until his passing in 2018, leaving behind a legacy of imagination, creativity, and enduring characters beloved by millions.